So we're going to have a look at square numbers and explain exactly what we mean by square numbers. After all, it is a good question to ask, what are they? Well, essentially, what a square number is we can identify them because if you take any number, let's say number x, and we multiply it by itself, we get a square number. Now I'm going to explain that in a second. So for example, let's say I substitute for x an actual number like 1. Okay, so we go 1 multiplied by 1. What will that equal? Well, that will equal 1. And 1 happens to be a square number. But how come? Well, let's have a look. If I am to take a little square, right, and count how many squares wide it is, well, it's 1 square wide. And then I was to count how many squares high it is, well, it's 1 square high. And if I was to multiply one side by the other side, so in other words, 1 times 1, I would get 1. And how many squares do I have in total? Well, there's 1 square, as you can see. And so this becomes a square number. So another way to express this is to say 1 squared. Okay, so let's have a look at another number. Let's say we do 2 times 2. Okay, so 2 multiplied by 2. Well, that's going to equal 4. Okay. So how does that look as a diagram? Okay, so here I go again. What I'm saying is I've got 2 squares along the width and 2 squares on the height. And 2 multiplied by 2 is 4. And as you'll see, there's 1, 2, 3, 4 squares. So 4 happens to be a square number. And we can represent 2 times 2 by saying 2 squared, because this is what we call an exponent or an index. So I'll write that up here, an exponent or an index or a power. Okay, so we're always going to be using to the power of 2 or an exponent of 2 or an index of 2. So that means I can now just adjust my first explanation, move that out to here, because now I understand that when we're talking about square numbers, 1 times 1 equals 1, which is the same as saying 1 squared, which is 1 times 1. Okay, so I think it's time. Let's have another look at, or have a look at a different number. Let's try the next number along, the next counting number, 3 multiplied by 3. Okay, now that equals 9. So as a diagram, we'll represent it like this. So again, as you can see, there are 3 along the base, 3 squares along the base, and 3 squares up the side here. And so what that means is 3 times 3 equals 9. And that should mean we've got 9 squares in total. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So we've got 9. So we now know that 3 times 3 equals 9. And another way to represent the 3 by 3 part is to say 3 squared. Let's have a look at one more number. Okay, let's skip one just for interest's sake and go with 5 multiplied by 5. Well, that equals 25. And another way to express 5 times 5 is to say 5 squared. So how does that look as a diagram? Well, it looks like this. As you can see, I've got 5 squares along one side, let's say the width, and 5 squares on the height. And altogether, if I count all these squares up, I'm going to get 25 squares. 5 times 5 equals 25. So 25 is another square number. So 1 is a square number, 4 is a square number, 9 is a square number, 25 is a square number, and see if you can figure out which one I missed out that should go in here. Okay, yeah, so the one I missed out was 4 times 4. That equals 16. That's a square number. And we can also represent 4 times 4 by saying 4 squared. Okay, let's have a quick review and see if you understand. Okay, so let's have a quick revision of the material we've just covered. If I was to write this, 7 squared, what does that mean as an equation? What is being multiplied by what? Okay, so 7 squared means 7 times 7. Okay, this power or index or exponent here tells me how many times I multiply this number. So in this case, I should have 2 7s. They multiply by each other, and that equals 49, and 49 is a square number. Let's try this one. If I was to write 4 squared, okay, what that means is what times what? Okay, so this tells me how many times I'm multiplying this digit, so it's 4 times 4. And 4 times 4 is 16, and 16 is a square number. We'll do one more. If I was to write, let's say 2 squared. Yep, it's 2 times 2, but not because it says here 2 squared, this bit here, not because that's there. This doesn't mean 2 times 2 necessarily. This just means that 2 needs to appear twice. Needs to appear twice in the multiplication equation, and there we have 4. And as we've already seen, 4 is a square number. And speaking of square numbers, well, what are some of the square numbers that we should know? Well, we should know 1. We should know 4. We should know 9. We should know 16. We should know 25. We should know 36. We should know 49. We should know 64, 81, and 100 at the very least. So how do I get that? That there is 1 squared. That is 2 squared. That is 3 squared. That is 4 squared. 5 squared. 6 squared. 7 squared. 8 squared. 9 squared. And 10 squared. And what do those actually mean? Well, this means 1 times 1, 2 times 2, 3 times 3, 4 times 4, 5 times 5, 6 times 6, 7 times 7. We'll do that again. 7 times 7, 8 times 8, 9 times 9, and 10 times 10. And square numbers can be expressed like this. You actually give their value, or they can be expressed in this way as well, as one number or a whole number squared. Okay, and that's it for now.